Yes, yes, yes. Very good. Wrapping up this great Christmas series today with a wonderful Christmas message. Sinners like me, it get us amped for the Christmas season. But to be honest, a while back, John was taking us through like, hey, here's the series that we're going to do leading up to Christmas. It's called Sinners Like Me. And I thought, like, honestly, as a church, there are a few things that we need to talk about more than sinners like John. And so I was like, this is going to be a great series. Seconds later, I realized like I had grossly misunderstood what the name of the title of the series was. So instead, I was wrong, but it's been great. But this series is not that. It's a look at the backstory of Matthew's account of Jesus' life and the Christmas story, really. And while there's Luke's account where he gives us shepherds and angels, Matthew, he does something a bit unique. What he does is he employs a much different method to really draw in his audience. So a few weeks ago, our son comes home from school, and he seems kind of down. He seems quiet. He's like really subdued, more so than normal. And so my wife and I kind of look at each other, and then we ask him, Ben, everything okay, buddy? Like, you doing all right? And he's like, yeah. And then a little bit later, it comes out that we find out he's been assigned this project, that before Christmas break, he's going to have to give a speech. He's going to have to stand up in front of the class for a few minutes. He's got to talk about all of his favorite holiday traditions, and he's got to do it from memory. And that's not necessarily his strong suit. And so he was already just full of dread, and we felt so bad. He's just like, I can't even have fun playing video games because I'm thinking about how bad this is going to be. We didn't want him to worry about it, and so Lindsay assured him, hey, it's going to be just fine. And Dad speaks in front of people sometimes, and so he'll help you prepare for it. And so Ben and I sit down, and we start looking at the requirements and the rubric, and it's all really standard stuff. But the thing that caught my eye was that his teacher wanted all of the students to think of like a catchy opening, right? Something that would get their audience attention and make them want to listen. And he was like, I don't know what I would do for that. And so I said, well, there's a bunch of different things you could do. Like, you could start with a question. You ask your audience a question. You could do that. Ben, you could tell a joke. That would be fun. You could tell a story. You could do a song lyric. You could refer to your pastor and boss as a sinner. Like, there's so many different things that you could do to start this off, right? And it's this great communication principle. I love it. I love that his teacher is going, hey, I want to help you attract the audience, captivate your audience, and make them have an interest in what you're about to share. A great principle. And so you might expect, as Matthew begins his account, that he is going to use one of those techniques, but instead he does something that is drastically different. He starts with a genealogy. He begins with the birth line of Jesus, and he traces it from Abraham all the way to Jesus' own parents. And while he goes through the names of dozens and dozens of people across dozens of generations, within that line, he includes the names of a handful of individuals whose own lives were associated with scandal and controversy, particularly the names of women. And during this series, we've looked at the names of some of those people like Tamar, and people like Rahab. And so in this series, we've discovered that Matthew wants us to understand really what Christmas is all about. It was about a heavenly Father who saw so much brokenness and pain in this world and in people's lives. And he was moved to the point of entering into that mess, of coming into it, but more importantly, providing a solution for it. We've seen that at Christmas, Jesus didn't simply just come out of a love for sinners. I'm sure it was that. But in Matthew's story, we see that Jesus came from a family of sinners, and his family line was full of them. And for Matthew, being a guy who had so much shame and regret, this was incredible news because it meant he's going like, Jesus came for sinners. He came for sinners like me. And Jesus' family tree was this reminder to Matthew that God uses the most broken, like seemingly unredeemable parts. How can anything good come out of this to accomplish his beautifully redemptive purpose? And even more, as Matthew lived this, he wanted people to know that this was good news of great joy because men and women with an embarrassing past were not an embarrassment to Jesus. They were who he came for and who he welcomed to follow him. And so Matthew does not flinch when it comes to mentioning the names of a number of people who fall in Jesus' genealogy here. he actually seems to be intentional about getting all the skeletons out of the closet before anybody can ask any questions about it. So last week we looked at the story of Rahab, and as Matthew continues the genealogy, it's not long before we see the name of another woman pop up. And so here we continue in verse 5. Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. And Ruth, you hear that name. Some of you are like, hey, I know that name. There are so many names I don't know, but I know that name because Ruth is the one, like, if I remember correct, Ruth follows her mother-in-law to a foreign country. She's got like this devotion. And Ruth, while she's there, she meets this guy, Boaz, and they fall in love. And I'm pretty sure it was like the original Hallmark Christmas movie. Like, I think that's Ruth, right? I know Ruth's story. And Matthew's like, that's not all of the story. I'm including Ruth here for another reason. And it's because Ruth, like Rahab, was not an Israelite. Ruth was a Moabite. And the Moabites, well, they were descendants of Abraham as well. Because Abraham, he's got this nephew. His nephew is named Lot. And Lot lived in Sodom, as in Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, that story unfolds. And they're living in a time where the surrounding areas are burned down. Lot and his daughters are living in a cave. And his daughters start thinking about their future. They go, hey, if we don't do something about this, we will live in this cave the rest of our lives. No husbands, no sons. So how about this? And they get this plan. How about we get dad like blackout drunk the next couple nights? And what follows is a verse I guarantee you never memorized. As a result, both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their own father. When the older daughter gave birth to a son, she named him Moab. He became the ancestor of the nation now known as the Moabites. Ugh. Let's go ahead and get that off the screen. We don't need to think about that more. But Matthew reminds us of something here. He says, don't forget that Ruth is in Jesus' family line as well. Ruth, the Moabite. And the Moabites are part of this family tree too. Well, Ruth and Boaz, they have a son. We got Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. And here we go. Like the first name that's got a title attached to it, like King David. All right, this is extremely important to see his name in the family line of Jesus because there's this expectation that the Jewish Messiah would be a direct descendant from the line of King David. And David's got this throne, but the Messiah is going to have an eternal throne, meaning that there is no end to his rule or his reign. It's not just for a few decades. It is a king who is king forever. And before we start thinking, okay, we got David and Goliath David the warrior, David the poet, David the man after God's own heart, David the guy who finally had it all together, Matthew continues. He says, well, David was the father of Solomon. And again, it might be easy for Matthew to stop right there and continue on, and yet he doesn't. He says, David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Oof. And some of you are like, I know this story. Like, you don't have to reference it, Matthew. You don't have to, put the spotlight on it. Again, you could just let it slide. But Matthew says, I don't want to do that. I want to let the reality of this mess sink in. And so he says it like it happened. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. And immediately, as Matthew is writing this, all of the original hearers and readers, his audience, they're well acquainted with this story, and they are transported to this account that we read in 2 Samuel chapter 11. And it picks up and it goes like this. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. Well, one evening, David got up from his bed and walked around the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. And the woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. And so from the very opening lines of this account, we sense something's off. It's springtime, and the kings are supposed to be off with their armies at war, and David always was. Like, he was known for that. He's a great military hero and warrior, and yet he's not. And so what gives? Well, whatever the case, he chooses to stay behind in Jerusalem. And one day, while he is up on the rooftop, it's early evening, and he sees a beautiful woman who is bathing. And it's important to note that this is not a woman who's up there trying to seduce him or entice him. She's actually performing a religious purification ritual, which makes what's going on kind of ironic. And so David sees, and he asks, "Who's that?" And it's probably more like, "Hey, who's that?" Like, it's a little like too excited about it, right? And so there's a guy, and he says, well, that is Bathsheba. She's the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. He's saying, she's the daughter of one of your close friends, so stop looking. Like, she is the wife of your loyal lieutenant, so stop asking. Her husband and her father are both risking their lives for the sake of your kingdom. So stop thinking like this, David, right? It should have been enough to get him to stay away from that train of thought, but it wasn't. And so he has people who go and get her. And to be clear, we have to say here, we don't know, we won't have any idea if Bathsheba is a willing participant in any of this. We don't know if there's any part of her who actually wanted to be involved in any of this. Things we do know that women's rights and preferences were often completely disregarded in the ancient world. We also know that David, as a king, was a person with incredible authority and power, and he's somebody that people don't say no to. And so this happens. She came to him, and he slept with her. And we don't know. Again, maybe after the fact, David felt immediate remorse. Maybe he just went, what have I done? But soon enough, there's news that comes his way. The woman conceived and sent word to David saying, I am pregnant. And so he's at a crossroads right here. What do I do with what I've done? Like, I have made this horrible choice. I've participated in destructive behavior. It was my decision, and that decision has rippled into the lives of other people. I didn't just make a little mistake here. I did what I knew was wrong. I sinned. And so, what is the decision going to be? Will I choose to confess, or will I conceal, right? Will I confess? Will I admit what I've done? Will I own the mess that I've made? Will I face the music here? Or will I try to conceal it? Am I going to cover it up? Am I going to hide it? Am I going to pretend it didn't happen? Am I going to try to lie my way out of this situation? And the thing is, we all know what that is like. We've all been in that spot before, whether as kids or as teenagers or as adults, right? There was something that we broke, and it's like, who did that? And what are we going to do? Are we going to confess, or are we going to conceal? There was a lie that we told our parents, and we have the opportunity. Do I come clean, or do I try to pretend that there's something else going on here? There's a behavior that I told my spouse, I will never do this again until I do. And then what do we do in that moment? And the thing is, when we're in that position, we are left to make the choice between confession and concealment. And when we are there, there's this voice that is so loud. It is the voice of shame. The voice of shame, man, I just know that this voice is so powerful. It is so antagonistic, and it is such a liar. Because the voice of shame will always want to tell us lies about our own worth, how big of a screw-up we have been, how we always will be. The voice of shame will tell us lies about our future and how we will never be able to come back from this. The voice of shame tries to make us think that the consequences of confessing are far worse than the consequences of concealing, and it is such a nasty, hateful, and often convincing voice. And it's there in that crossroads that David makes up his mind. He knows what he's going to do. He chooses to conceal. He attempts to manage his own sin by introducing more sin into the situation. And so, David sent this word to Joab. Send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent him to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was, how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, hey, go down to your house and wash your feet. So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. And David is facing the fear of being found out. And so he hatches this plan to go, hey, you know what? Let's go ahead and pull Uriah from the battlefield. Let's bring him back home. I'm going to pretend like I actually care. How are things going, man? How are you doing? And hey, by the way, since you're here, it might be a good idea. Just go ahead, go home, be with your wife. You've been gone for a while, so you know, and to set the mood, I'll send a gift. Maybe send some champagne. And so you, just do what you need to do, man. Nice, he tells him, you're a genius, King David. You solved the problem, crisis averted. Everything is going to be great. But Uriah does not go home. Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all his master's servants and did not go down to his house. David was told, Uriah didn't go home. So he asked Uriah, haven't you just come from a military campaign? Why didn't you go home? He's frustrated. Sometimes this happens. It's I'm scheming, I'm plotting. Things aren't going the way I want. Now I'm angry and resentful. And he's going, Uriah, what are you doing? I told you to go home, enjoy being with your wife. So what gives? And Uriah says to David, see, here's the thing. The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents. My commander Joab and my Lord's men are camped in the open country. And so in light of that, how could I? How could I go to my house to eat and drink and make love to my wife? And as surely as you live, I will not do such a thing. He says, how would I behave that way? I can't indulge myself while my men are on the battlefields. It's just not in my character. Like King David, you know that I've got more integrity than that. Well, David, he tries the same scheme again. But this time, it doesn't work as well. And so he even goes to get Uriah drunk in order to compromise his decision-making. But it's this sharp contrast here of Uriah's really honorable character and David's utter desperation. And so now David comes up with an even sicker plan. It says, in the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In it, he wrote, put Uriah out in front where the fighting is fiercest. Then withdraw from him, so he will be struck down and die. And he's just full of it. He's full of guilt, and he's trying to manage his way through the mess that he's made, and nothing is working, and now he's mad. He's upset. And so he seals a letter, and he gives it to Uriah, and he makes him carry his own death sentence back to Joab in the midst of battle. And so as his commander, Joab, carries out David's orders, and Uriah is moved to the front lines, and everyone else withdraws, and Uriah is killed in battle, just as David had hoped. And soon enough, the news reaches the city, and David is thinking, okay, I've finally taken care of it, and I don't need to worry about this anymore. Well, when Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. After the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. 9 months later, Nathan the prophet appears on the scene. Nathan is a spokesperson on behalf of God, and he's also a good and trusted friend to David. He's the only person who can speak to him honestly. And with him, he brings a story that he says, I need to relay this story to you. And he tells him a story of this rich man, and he's got everything. He's got a field full of sheep, and then he's got a poor neighbor, and the poor neighbor doesn't have much at all. He's got one small lamb. And the rich man is having a guest that's coming over to stay with him, and he wants to feed that guest. And so you know what he does? He goes to his neighbor, and he takes the only thing his neighbor has, and he slaughters that lamb in order to feed his guests. And why would he do that? He does it because he can. He does it because he's able. He does it because he thinks he can get away with it. And David hears what's happening in the midst of his kingdom, and he's furious. He's in such deep denial that he does not even see what's going on here. And he is upset. He says, this guy's got to pay. This guy's got to die. Who would ever do such a thing? Who is this man? And Nathan responds, and he says, well, you are the man. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your master's house to you, your master's wife into your arms. I gave you all Israel and Judah. And if all this had been too little, I would have given you even more. And so why? Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now, therefore, the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own. And then finally, David responds. David said to Nathan, you're right. I have sinned against the Lord. And day after day, and month after month, for the better part of a year, David was wrapped up in covering up and hiding and concealing his own sin. But finally, in that moment, it's like the mask falls off. And so David's response is to do the only thing he knows to do. He runs to the tabernacle. He falls on his face. He cries out to God for forgiveness. You're like, how do you know that? Well, we know that because we actually have a record of the prayer that David prayed. It's captured in Psalm chapter 51, and there's this short description that precedes it. It says, a psalm of David regarding the time Nathan the prophet came to him after David had committed adultery with Bathsheba. And to me, here's just an honest thought. It feels like if they're intent on giving David like writing credit, they didn't need to include all the details of that. It feels like they could just say a psalm of David after he walked through a really hard season. Like something where it's just like, it's very generic, and yet that's not what's in there. So David, he writes or he prays, have mercy on me, O God, because of your unfailing love. Because of your great compassion, would you blot out the stain of my sins? Wash me clean from my guilt. Purify me from my sin, for I recognize my rebellion, and it haunts me day and night. I have shame over what I have done. And there's this prayer, and it's taken from one of the lowest points of David's life or anybody's lives, and it becomes this song that's included in the songbook for the people of Israel. You're like, why would you include that in there? Why would you do that? Why would you keep a record of this or choose to bring any attention to it? A man who is seemingly great, if you take out this episode of his life. And honestly, I think it is so people like you and me would know that we've got a template to follow when we find ourselves in a similar spot. That we would know that we always have a choice. We have a choice not to conceal, but actually to confess. And that the consequences of concealing are far worse than the freedom that comes through confession. And I think it's included so that we would know the type of response that we will be met with by our Heavenly Father when we choose to turn to Him, when we are suddenly met with that awareness of all that's broken inside me or around me. And in fact, this concept, this act of confession, is an ongoing theme throughout the Scriptures. It's something that Jesus' earliest followers were marked by. And one of those followers, the Apostle John, he highlights the power that comes when we get to the point where we can actually be honest with ourselves and honest with God about our own brokenness and sin. And he says this, he says, see, if we claim to be without sin, if we're like, hey, that's an issue that other people have, but I don't have that, he says that's self-deception, and the truth is not in us. We're liars when we claim like we've got it all figured out. But then he relays some really incredible news. He says that if we confess our sins, that God is faithful and He's just, and He will forgive us our sins, and He will actually, it's better than that, He'll purify us from all the unrighteousness that's in us. That when we choose not to conceal, but actually when we choose to confess, we will encounter this really like remarkable, unexpected, intense, unending forgiveness of God. It's this capacity that God has to see it all, to accept us, and then release us from the penalty of what we've done and bring healing and transformation and redemption through our lives. And that is what David experienced. And that's available to every single one of us, no matter who we are and no matter what we've done. And David's life was a testament to all of that. For nearly 1,000 years later, one of David's descendants, a man named Joseph, and his new bride, Mary, well, they make their way to the town of Bethlehem, now known as the town of David. And they make their way there, and they are surrounded by scandal. And it's there that she gives birth to the Messiah, the great, 26 times over grandson of David. Well, of David and Bathsheba. And Matthew wants us to know that David and the entirety of David's life were part of Jesus' family tree. I mean, it's David the king, the military hero, the warrior, the poet, the man after God's own heart. And it's David, the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. David was a human being with high highs and low lows. And while Matthew could have chosen to gloss over the failures, he preferred to acknowledge them head on. And I think it's because we may respect a person's successes. We might be like, wow, I admire that. But we personally identify with their humanity. And part of what it is to be human is to know that we have struggles and we have failures and we have sin that through God we are able to overcome. And don't you find hope in this reality? Don't you find hope in knowing that if the grace of God would go after a man who did what David did, then the grace of God will go after a woman or a man like you and me? I mean, isn't it so powerful to remember that God uses the most broken, seemingly unredeemable, how could anything good come out of that parts of our lives to accomplish his beautifully redemptive purposes? And isn't it oddly comforting to be reminded that men and women with an embarrassing past are actually not an embarrassment to Jesus? I love that. There's a quote that from time to time we'll reference around here. It's from a man named Brennan Manning, and he highlights this reality. He says, see, when I get honest, I admit that I am a bundle of paradoxes. He says, I believe and I doubt. I hope and I get discouraged. I love and I hate. I feel bad about feeling good. I feel guilty about not feeling guilty. I'm trusting and I'm also suspicious. I'm honest and I still play games. Aristotle said I'm a rational animal. I say I'm an angel with incredible capacity for beer. Like, it is so relatable, but here's where it moves from relatable just to so powerful. He says that to live by grace, which is the only way God wants to relate to us, means to acknowledge my whole life story, the light side and the dark. In admitting my shadow side, I learn who I am, but I learn what God's grace means. As Thomas Merton put it, a saint is not someone who is good, but someone who experiences the goodness of God. And today, I feel like that is a message that I just want to internalize. I want everybody to hear that. That's what I want everybody to know. I want them to know that God sees us, that God sees you, and he sees all of you and the entirety of your life and your whole story and the highlights and your greatest hits. And he also sees the despair and the failure and the regrets. And God sees it all, and he doesn't walk away from you, and he is not done with you. Instead, he wants you to know that he's got a track record of using people who had this awareness of their own brokenness and then surprising them with unexpected grace. So please, never let the voice of shame win out. That's not the voice of God. Never tell yourself that you are too far gone. Never believe that someone around you or in your life is a lost cause, because it is not true. And Matthew knew that firsthand. See, for Matthew, it was a realization that God sees it all. God sees all of me, and he does not walk away from me. And instead, he makes a way for me to be part of his family. And he knew this was good news, and so he set out to share it. And he begins an account in a way that we might go, that's weird. He begins with a genealogy, with something that we could easily think, well, I think I'll skip over that. That's irrelevant. That's a little boring. But he knew better. He knew that he had to get our interest early on. He knew he had to capture his audience. And so he does something that's far better than a joke or a question or a stat. He said, I'm going to give you some unexpected names of unlikely people with unsavory stories, people who were involved in scandal and sin, people who were broken yet made right, people who Matthew says, they're sinners, but they're sinners just like me. And I'm going to show you how God invites them to be part of his family. And it's a family where every single person is going to have a seat at that table, because that's the meaning of Christmas, he says. Christmas is the story of a God who came to be with us grace to provide a solution to all the brokenness around us and inside of us, and then invites every single person to experience that grace, that love, and what it means to be part of that family. He said it's a story that is good news of great joy for all people, even someone like Tamar, even someone like Rahab the prostitute, even someone like Ruth the Moabite, or David the adulterer, David the murderer, or Matthew the tax collector, or me, or you. And so this morning, as we let that story sink in, I thought that we would end by actually internalizing that and celebrating communion. Communion is this reminder that Jesus came to this earth and he willingly chose to lay down his life on a Roman cross to free us from our own sin and brokenness. And so when we celebrate, we remind ourselves of God's posture. We remind ourselves of the forgiveness that he offers each of us, of the victory that he claimed over sin and death, and of the life that he invites us to live as we follow him. And so over the next few minutes, the band's going to lead us in a couple different songs, and we'll have plenty of time to make our way to the tables that are around the room. And as we go to those tables, the elements of the bread, which symbolizes Jesus' broken body, will be there. We can dip that into the juice, which represents his blood that was shed for our sin. And as you do, as you take that time, one of the things you might consider is actually praying a prayer. And I gave us a sample prayer that you might consider praying. It says this: Heavenly Father, thank you for Christmas. Thank you for sending your Son into this world to rescue me from my sin. I want to be part of your family and live transformed by your grace. And so as we prepare to take communion, I want to invite you to stand with me right now. And maybe as you're thinking through what you really want for Christmas, you're going, you know what I really want is actually the sentiment of that prayer. And if that's where you're at, then I would invite you to read that prayer aloud with me right now. Thank you for Christmas. Thank you for sending your Son into this world to rescue me from my sin. I want to be part of your family and live transformed by your grace. So as you're ready, you can make your way to the tables.
Snow is glistening, a beautiful sight. We're happy tonight.